Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Ascend's Women in Leadership Fireside Chat Series. I'm so excited for our conversation today, especially to be here with Terri. Terri Rockovich is the CEO and co-founder of Jinx. She's built an incredible career. She is a founding member of Casper and now runs one of the hottest wellness brands for dogs. Terri is a good friend, and I'm so pumped to host her today. Terri, thank you so much for joining us. This is gonna be really fun.
That was a very generous introduction. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So today we were supposed to be joined by Lindsay Kaplan, who is the co-founder and chief, but unfortunately she's really not well. So sending the best wishes to her and her family who are all recovering, wishing them a speedy recovery. And today here with Terri, we are going to talk about her mistakes as she's built up her career, how she's leveraged her network, something that is a buzzword. We get thrown around all the time, like you should build a network, but actually thinking about like, what does that actually mean? And how do you leverage your network to grow in your career to get where you want to go? So we're going to talk about that. And I have to say, I'm pretty excited to put a friend in the hot seat. So I think this is going to be especially fun for me at least. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivani. I am the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer an online leadership program to help women move into management. The leadership program is the program that I wish I had access to when I was making that transition into management. Our mission at Ascend is to elevate 10,000 women into leadership. It's a big way we're going to create the change that we need to see in today's workplaces. And we're doing it. We've had women from top companies like Google, DoorDash, Salesforce, Starbucks come out of the program feeling more confident, being able to get buy-in, even from dominant personalities, and growing faster in their careers, including getting promoted. I really think we need to have more open and honest conversations around what it takes to move up in your career, what it takes to be a good leader. And so much of the program is curated by senior leaders. And that's a big reason why we host these fireside chats. So you can learn directly from successful people around how do they do it? What are the challenges they overcame? What were the strategies they used? What are the bumps that they had along the way? And so super excited to be here. Today, Terri and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes, and then we'll dive into Q&A. So as we're going along, if something resonates with you, throw them into the chat. And if you have any questions, you can add any questions or vote them in the bottom right icon, the Q&A icon on your Zoom screen. So, all right, let's dive in. So Terri, maybe we can kick it off. You have this really fascinating and unique career journey. Can you share with us like a brief overview of it?
Yes, absolutely. So going way back, I graduated from college in 2007 with my undergrad. And my first job was in a digital agency in my hometown of Pittsburgh, PA. And so I was, the lowest person on the totem pole, just really supporting client accounts. I had only been working there for about a year when the financial crisis struck in 2008. And so the silver lining of that was that I was saved because I was a really cheap employee and a hard worker. But the agency went through a host of really significant layoffs and furloughs. And so I was kind of promoted and given an opportunity to manage Fortune 500 accounts more immediately, and really like have exposure to brands of all sizes with huge budgets, like 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure budgets. And so I was kind of thrown into the deep end, and was assigned to really creative growth campaigns. I think my biggest takeaway was that big brands move slow. And so process and bottlenecks and like approval after approval after approval really led me to wanting to be on the brand side in a much faster paced environment. So I had the opportunity to join my first startup. It was called ModCloth. It is a vintage inspired apparel company, started in e-commerce, started to pop up through owned retail, and really kind of had that rocket ship success after they had raised some capital and made some really good decisions and well-timed decisions as it relates to the growth strategy. And so I relocated from Pittsburgh to San Francisco. I was primarily responsible for managing their digital channels and growth marketing. I loved it. I mean, it was like a mostly female environment. It was dog friendly. I had adopted my oldest rescue as soon as I moved to San Francisco, just for like immediate companionship. I brought him to work every single day, and I made so many friends that were, at first coworkers and now like lifelong friends. And so ultimately, after the course of 4 years, I wanted a bigger scope of work. I moved to New York City. I joined Casper pre-launch as the second employee and then first marketing hire. And so little did I know the rocket ship that I was jumping on. And then even though she's not here, I worked in really close partnership with Lindsay to build that engine and that marketing program. Our budgets went from like $30,000 a month at launch to $7 million a month by the time I left. And I could not have done it with anyone else. Lindsay, for those of you that don't know her, she's a co-founder of Chief, and just generally one of the most brilliant humans I've had the opportunity to work with. Now she's a very good friend and companion, but we just had this opportunity to work on such an incredible project that really kind of postured us to then go and start our own businesses. And so among more amazing people, I also met my co-founders who were working at Casper at the time. We kind of graduated at different periods, but we really kind of came together as pet parents with shared frustrations in terms of finding dog food that our dogs enjoyed eating, that was good for them, and that totally didn't impede our lifestyles. And so after my dog was in a pretty bad car accident where he kind of shattered one of his lower vertebrae, needed a back surgery, and then had this pretty critical recovery and rehabilitation phase. His weight and weight management was like one of the biggest pieces of him recovering close to 100%. And so that was really when I started doing a ton of research on the category. I started like turning, bags over and reading ingredient panels and understanding guaranteed analysis. And the information that was available to me on the internet was kind of conflicting and confusing. And I thought that was very problematic as a dog parent. But then also after having tried literally so many different brands and so many different formats of food, I arrived at a very kind of confused position, which was like, why are there thousands of options and none of them work for my dog? I can't be the only person. And so we had tried raw and it was way too hard on Blitz's stomach. We had tried fresh and he got food poisoning and wound up back in the doggy hospital. We had tried dry and he was not interested in eating it at all. And we had tried wet and it made his stool really inconsistent and runny. And so in kind of circling back with my former coworkers, now friends, and eventually co-founders, Samir and Michael, we decided to go and see if we could raise some capital and launch our own dog food brand that was kind of rooted in the essence where it was a healthier alternative to dry format, pantry friendly food, but also had kind of like a modern look, a modern feel, was most importantly designed to be appropriate for modern dogs and their lifestyles, because not all of us have dogs that like, roam a farm all day and defend our property, right? Like they're in 1,000 square foot apartments in a lot of cases. And so we spent a year going through the formation phase after we had raised capital. God bless you. And then we had launched the brand really like in the height of COVID at the top of 2020. And so for the past 2 years, we have been growing it. We just closed a Series A fundraise in November, so just short of $30 million, which was really like one of the most transformative professional experiences I've ever had. And we're launching a host of major retail partnerships this year. We're, hiring, we're investing in product innovation. This is a category that moves really, really slow. So kind of, being, I would say being disruptive is easy, because forcing change and, introducing new concepts and new ideas and moving fast from a product development perspective and offering dog food available at your chosen frequency through a subscription commerce and delivery model feels, like it should be table stakes, but it's not. And so we're just trying to solve the own pain points and problems that we had as dog parents. And here we are.
I love that. I love that story. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Jinx. The food, like all the dogs I know love it. So that's awesome. And I just love that like the whole arc. So I'd love to dig into more about kind of like the story behind the story. And let's kind of talk about, some of the bumps that you've had along the way, a failure that you've had along the way around it. And I ask that because, we often celebrate successes where you don't share our failures. I think hearing you talk about it, it's like such just like really amazing arc, but I imagine there was struggles along the way. And I really want to make it a more normal conversation to like talk about these struggles, because in reality, like 100 failures will lead to one success. And so what's a failure that you've had in your career? What have you learned from it? What advice would you have for us?
Yeah. So how much time do you have? Because I could name failure after failure after failure. I had heard this quote once and it really stuck with me. And it was basically like, when you win, you win, and that should be celebrated. But when you lose, you learn. And I would say, especially in my journey to become an entrepreneur and a co-founder, like I have failed so much, or like just given my type A personality, I have wanted things to be perfect. And when you wait for perfect to happen and it never does, you end up losing time, and that indecision is more costly than making the wrong decision. And so I have just gotten very comfortable with failure and making mistakes and moving quickly, and like really attempting not to make the same mistake twice. But I think in terms of like a really specific example, I was at a startup for a while, and I think I kept like hitting the same wall in terms of certain frustrations within the company, and kind of being limited in terms of my growth and career trajectory. And so I was so desperate to leave that I made a very fast decision in terms of an offer that was put in front of me and seemed too good to be true. And because I kind of had this like crippling and fluctuating anxiety, I went from kind of like one burning house to the other. And I didn't take the time to kind of create clarity and make like a really well-informed and intentional decision. And listen, like ultimately it led to a life of consulting and networking with investors and founders and leadership teams, which made me grow up very quickly, and then ultimately decide to start my own company. But I think that running from something is not always necessarily the best answer. And I think in my case, through my experience, I certainly did that. And I realized very quickly once I got to the next fire that it wasn't going to be a long-term place for me. And so, the next couple of months were about trying to set that company up for success, exit pretty peacefully, and move on. But, I will say it totally kind of disrupted my life in a way where I had left New York. I had relocated. I was in corporate housing, and I had moved all of my stuff. I didn't know anybody in Austin. And, I just thought like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, I just left everything behind, my entire network. My reputation only matters in New York City. And so it felt like I was starting from scratch, which was a little unsettling. But, I would say overall, my learning was to move slower and be incredibly thoughtful about big decisions, because even if it takes a little bit more time, like the diligence is so worth feeling 150% confident about that big decision. So it was something that I kind of learned the hard way. And I think ultimately it put me on a path to kind of get where I am today, which is definitely in the right place. Like it feels so much different to be doing something that is like, really a passion project. But, sometimes you have to like stumble and dust yourself off and get back up. And like, luckily I've had a really supportive, like family and friend set and coworkers and now business partners. And so I think I'm where I'm supposed to be, but certainly like the path was not pretty or clean or perfect getting here.
Yeah, I can relate to that so much. I also have a tendency to go really fast and like just kind of like pulling back. And so thank you so much for sharing that around kind of the times when you have made a decision really fast and later it was regretful. And I'm curious how, how you're like now going forward in those moments, I have learned how to be more thoughtful and really think about things in long term. What are some strategies that you found helpful to do that? Because at least for me, I get so caught up in my own head. And it's hard for me to like pull away from that and just like be like, and actually give me like, okay, I just need to calm down. I just need to like think about more strategically, like what the next move is. So what are some things that have helped you be more thoughtful in those moments?
Yeah, so I think sometimes when you're like either too close to the sun or you're just running really fast, like pace and quick decisioning is something that that you just train for, and you get better and better at it. But I think in terms of starting to feel like something isn't right, I typically take a step back and like really try to consult people outside of my immediate echo chamber. And people who I know aren't going to tell me what I want to hear, but might tell me something that is like hard to hear or uncomfortable. My partner is also an entrepreneur. He typically knows me well enough to give me like really well-intentioned advice. And then I've really kind of built this incredible network of women who, you know, may have experienced something similar, or have crossed like, you know, the same bridge, so to speak. And so I think having like really private, intimate conversations with other females who are either in like executive positions or are co-founders and continue to kind of experience the same things has really kind of just given me new perspective and things to consider. And I think like anytime new concepts or solutions or ideas are introduced, like it takes me a second to process them and appreciate them. But then once I do, it typically leads me to like an alternative path that's ultimately a better path.
Yeah, that's so great. And so it sounds like I love that echo chamber and like getting out of the echo chamber. And it sounds like, yeah, surround yourself with these group of people who you trust and understand you well enough that they're going to be able to give you some advice to help you get out of your own head. Am I understanding that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. So, you know, it sounds like you kind of now understood how to like manage that. What's like an area of improvement that you're currently working on?
Okay. This is another like really long list. I would say that there's probably two. And you know, I think that I had spent the majority or the better half of 2021 fundraising. And so I was just like heads down, getting my business capitalized was my number one priority. And so I really kind of like blocked out a lot. And I realized in doing that, like I had disregarded, you know, some friendships. I didn't necessarily like make time for relationships that were important because I was kind of like in this all consuming process and experience. And so after kind of coming up for air and water and starting a new year with kind of like a fresh attitude and money in the bank, it's really important to me not only to like go back and invest in the relationships that are important to me. So like fewer, stronger relationships, but then also just generally like support other entrepreneurs. Not necessarily like unique to gender, but I know how hard it is to, and how brave you have to be to like launch something, get it off the ground, go on the campaign trail in terms of fundraising, be indicted for like your idea and your passion project and have to like fight for it. So I really am trying to do a better job at like putting other entrepreneurs on you know, a pedestal and helping them in whatever way they can, promoting their brands, buying their product, and really just like serving as a mechanism for support, because most people like feel that and appreciate it, even if they don't have like the mindfulness or the time to thank you. Like every single post or purchase like really helps at early stages. And so I'm really trying to support entrepreneurs in a more meaningful way. And then maybe like one of the more functional things is just like I focus on being more patient in my personal and professional life every single day. I think being a type A personality, I want to jump in and fix things as soon as they start to feel like they're falling apart or breaking. I want to like immediately address conflict. I want to fire off like a really reactive email, but I think letting the dust settle has truly served me in a way where you give yourself some time to process. Maybe you go to people for some advice in terms of like how to handle things, and then you craft a more thoughtful like response or reaction just based on what you want in terms of a desired outcome. And so it typically results in a much better situation. Like sometimes problems solve themselves without having to be involved. Like you force someone to figure it out instead of kind of handing them an answer or solution. And so I'm really working on patience. I think especially the email thing is something where I will draft something and not send it. And then if I still feel the same way the next day or the day after that, then I'll send the email. But really giving it some time to kind of like breathe, open up, and potentially solve itself has served me, I would say, more recently.
I love that. I think of that, just like holding onto the email, just get your thoughts out, and then just having that to like hold yourself back. It's so important, and yeah, can save you from a lot of messy situations without
Yes.
like a worse. I see a question in the chat around self-critic. Like now that we're kind of talking about improvements and kind of bumps along the way, there's a question in the chat like, how do you manage the self-critic in you?
So I hold myself to high standards. I think that like if you desire like success and fulfillment through kind of your professional project, or persona, like you should, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. For myself, like I've just learned to let things go. I think that like perfection is something I feel like I chased well into my 20s, and then realizing like the quality of perfection like doesn't necessarily exist, or it's totally defined differently based on the person. I've just been able to let go of the idea of something being in like its most desirable state, and work with things that are just like a little like looser and less perfect, and maybe like minimum viable product state instead of being like fully fleshed out. And I think by doing that, you release like some of the pressure around something having to be immediately successful. And then again, like making mistakes through that journey and then accepting them and releasing them is really important, because if you're holding on to some of that stuff, it becomes just like a very heavy weight to bear. So I think more so it's just kind of whether it's coming from like an external variable or an internal variable, just like letting yourself feel something and letting it pass through and releasing it has been the way for me to kind of move past, maybe some of those marks that I held myself to that were unrealistic in the first place, or maybe that frankly, like I just honestly missed, like I wasn't able to kind of hit in the way I wanted to hit it. And moving on and releasing it has just allowed me to focus on the next thing that's in front of me.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that ties into digging more into your professional experience. That sounds like it was a big kind of transformational change for you. Is like, how do you kind of like managing that? What's the most transformational professional experience you've had in your career?
So I would say there's two that stick out to me. The first of which was getting an executive coach. And so I had always been someone who performed really well, but I think in terms of my, maybe like the way that I show up, it was like very candid and very honest and very straightforward. And so I had received a piece of recurring feedback, which was just like, to be more buttoned up and have more leadership presence. And so I was gifted an executive coach who was really intended to teach me leadership qualities. I hope she's on in the audience. Her name is Jeannie Coomer. I'll put her website in the chat, but she was like not only serving me in terms of just how to like really level up my executive presence and like refine and finesse my leadership skills, but she was like a therapist. And I would say that especially going through what I was going through at the time, which was just professionally like intense. And there was a lot of pressure and eyes on my role specifically because we were, running the growth marketing arm of the organization with a lot of eyes on us. She really taught me like how to like process and compartmentalize that pressure and focus on the things that matter, and like show up and add value and not necessarily like take everything so personally. And while it was a couple quarters of working with her directly, I think that like she gave me tools that I still use today, and really like I didn't realize the growth that I was experiencing like through that relationship in that moment, but I had such a deep appreciation for it in retrospect. And then like I've worked with Jeannie again in launching my own business. to help figure out like our founder dynamic and really like how to constructively debate and build a significant company successfully. And so she's fantastic. I credit her with like so much of just growing me up and getting me ready for the next big thing. And then I would say like another really kind of transformative experience was fundraising. I think like you have to have courage, and you have to be ready for people to like indict everything from the idea through the model through the execution. And so in a lot of cases, it's really hard to hear someone like pick apart and challenge, just like your mentality and your plan, and your decisions, and you develop thick skin very fast, but you don't let it slow you down. And I think if you can take that constructive feedback and like make the thing better, make the project better, it's a great way to kind of use that type of feedback, that constructive feedback in a positive way. And then ultimately, like once you get the outcome you want, like you have just kind of accomplished the impossible. Like it was the next mark you had to hit. And so I had never thought that I would be able to raise like $30 million. Like that was not 3 years ago. That was not even on my roadmap. And so it's just kind of like once you start to move the goal line and push yourself further and create new boundaries for yourself, and then you kind of like move past them, it's pretty incredible. And so I would say that has now given me confidence to like run my company and get it to the next stage and show up, in offices or meeting rooms or board conversations that I never thought I deserved to be in. And so I would say like those two things specifically stick out to me as just like transformational in terms of my professional experience.
I love all that. It's so good, especially, the fundraising example, like you achieving something that you never thought you would do and breaking that boundary is so empowering in itself. And you clearly had very impressive results from that. And I can definitely relate to the coaching part. I've had some really transformative leadership coaches myself. And that was actually a huge inspiration for me to start Ascend, because like being able to like having someone kind of hold your hand or like having someone kind of guide you through it is so key in our careers. And I think so often we feel like we have to do it on our own. And it's like, I want to create a space for other women to be able to get that support also. So that definitely resonates, all of what you've shared around this. So thank you for sharing that. One thing I'd love to talk about is networking. It's something that, as we're talking about like transformational careers, it's something that like is so important in order for people to like move up in their careers. Because, often people will work with you because of the relationship, not necessarily like what you bring to the table, like not just like of your product or how smart you are. But it's a buzzword that gets tossed around a lot without like really clear, like, what does it actually mean? How do you build an authentic manner? I think especially for a lot of people, it feels like sleazy or like just feels inauthentic. But you've done it in such a powerful manner. I think like, Lindsay and you are such a good example of like kind of elevating each other, being good friends. So I'm curious, like, how have you thought about building your network and how has it helped you in your career?
Well, I've always probably like gotten maybe like my own energy from others. So whether it's like working and collaborating with internal or external stakeholders, asking people for like ideas and opinions and feedback, working with coaches or kind of being introduced to new ideas through just like socializing with people outside of your kind of like day-to-day contacts and exposures, I think is something that I've just naturally done because I tend to be more of an extrovert and tend to like just really be attracted to other people who don't think like me or look like me. And so that is a natural tendency. I would say like earlier in my career, my network had eventually started introducing opportunities. So it's like every startup I went to was because, someone kind of like opened a door, pushed me in that direction. And it ended up being like pretty serendipitous in terms of where I was at, what I was looking for, and the opportunity in front of me. And when that lines up, it feels really right. And you trust your gut a little bit and you step into it. But I think that how it's manifested itself is I have made lifelong friends through my network. And I have been introduced to new investors that have funded my business through my network. And I have found like mentors to really serve as lights of inspiration when like things get really hard and you think that they're impossible to solve for. And so my professional network now is a safe place to like access people where you can have safe conversations, about like your business and where you're going, or your frustrations and like how to manage them or better manage them. And so I kind of use my network in a variety of ways, but like I don't know what I would do without it. And I would also say like, sometimes you work with someone and then it doesn't make sense anymore, or you move on and the next project doesn't allow you to necessarily reconnect with them, and the next project doesn't either, but then like the last project does. And so I've had these working relationships that have been on ice, where like you just keep in contact with someone and then you like hire them at your startup, or you use them to grow your business, or you add them as an advisor. And so, it kind of like comes full circle to a certain degree. And like, I am very much of the mindset not to burn bridges. That doesn't mean that like you have to be everyone's cup of tea. But I think that like, hosting relationships, treating people respectfully, always kind of serves you in a way where like that person may become really relevant, 10 years from now, and you just don't have the ability to predict that. So I cherish my network. I think it's like one of the most precious assets that I have as, now a business owner. But then also because like people make your experiences like so much better. And, again, drawing from that energy and being inspired from that energy, or having that support really has so much value that's hard to quantify, but something that, is totally worth the investment.
I love all of that. One thing that really stuck out to me there is like, you can keep some relationships on ice, and maybe like for a couple of years or for projects, like nothing really happens. And then you get that one moment where it really clicks. How do you keep those relationships in ice? Like, what does the outreach look like? What is it? How do you cultivate it? So when you actually do need them, you're not just reaching out cold and be like, hey, I'm here now. Let's work together. I need this from you.
Yeah. So, okay. So I have like a pretty like interesting and specific example. But basically, when I was at ModCloth, I had a boss, Stephanie Lim, and like, had personally become really close to her, used her as a mentor, went to her wedding, didn't know much about her husband at the time. And then like moved on, right? Like I went to Casper, I was in New York for 4 years, moved to Austin, I was at Outdoor Voices for a year. And then once I was ready to kind of start my own business and I started fundraising, I had gone to pitch Initialized in San Francisco, walked into their office and realized that Gary Tan, Stephanie's husband, was one of like the primary guys that I would be pitching. And it's just like that type of thing where like, of course, I was like, I was at your wedding, and he remembered me surprisingly. And there was kind of like that warmth and that relationship that made the difference in initiating the conversation and created like a level of comfort and energy within the room that created a little less pressure. It doesn't mean that it was like an easier pitch, but I think that like pre-existing relationship was one that I didn't expect to come back and serve me in any way. And I would just say that like, I kept in touch with Stephanie. I watched her like have children. Even though we were on separate coasts, we were able to kind of like stay in each other's lives, albeit remotely. When she traveled to New York, we'd try to grab dinner and vice versa. So I think it's just like putting the effort in, and not really having expectations in terms of it like coming back and rewarding you or paying off in any sense. But then like when it does, it feels very meant to be, so to speak. It feels like very much so outside of your control and part of like a larger plan and a larger scheme that maybe like you don't have so much control over. So I would just say like that investment in relationships that like feel important, feel really right to you is so critical in terms of just being able to keep in touch with people, and not necessarily like reach out when you need something, but more so, like just genuinely be interested in what they're doing, why they're doing it. And then, ultimately, if it makes sense to kind of reconnect in a professional capacity, then, then the relationship is warm, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such an authentic way of doing it. And it's honestly like feels less pressureful. Like you said, like when you get into it, you just have that rapport, and that actually helps you be more successful, and it's way easier. It feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. And listen, like I'm someone who like hates asking people for favors. I'd rather something take like 10 times longer and be 10 times more expensive than like go and ask someone to do something for me. And so I really like only choose to do that in like rare and special circumstances. And then also, I don't go back to people that like I don't have warm relationships with. It's like I haven't spoken to you in a decade and now I need something. Like that's not the way like I manage relationships. And so I think it's just important again to like really identify the ones that are important and worthy of like continued investment, with no expectation, but like merely because you enjoy that person or you respect that person. And then again, like if it comes back and it serves you, then that's just gravy.
For sure. Yeah, I was just thinking about it. I guess it's like an example here where it's like I host these regular chats, and I was like, wait, I didn't care, it would be awesome. We're friends, but I just like texted you and like, you want to come do this with me? And just like a fun thing. And it's just, yeah, you keep, and I mean, so many of the wins I've had in my career actually come from this network I've cultivated. And like you said, it's like, you're not being deliberate, you're not being transactional. It's very relational. And then it's like, if things work out, if not, it's fine. But like people are attracted to you because it's authentic and they
Yeah,
want to be around you.
that's like a very good way to put it. Like the transactional nature of relationships, and some like feel better than others, especially like when you've built frequency and depth with someone.
Yeah. Last question for you is something we ask all our guests. What's a piece of career advice that you want to leave with us?
Great question. So I would say like just because there are so many things that you can't control in life, in and outside of kind of your professional persona and career, I think that like I heard this and I, internalized it, and I am very mindful of it, especially when like there's just curveballs that you can't necessarily like predict, but you're forced to deal with. How you pivot is how you prosper. And so you're just forced to make decisions in truly like unplanned circumstances, but rolling with the punches, staying optimistic, which is really important because it's so easy to go to like a dark place very fast, especially when things are outside of your control or just generally are unexpected. Being thoughtful about decisions of every size, and then like choosing, I think, like courage over comfort, regardless of like your current place of security, are just things that have helped me deal with some unexpected circumstances, and really just try to make the best of the situation.
Wow, there's so many good nuggets in there. And so I actually love like how you pivot is how you prosper, choose courage over comfort. That's so good. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Well, Terri, thank you so much for joining us. This was really, really good. Like I love just hearing more about, how you thought about your career, how you've navigated it. Like I said, like lots of awesome like wisdom bombs all along the way. So I know I definitely have like lots of notes and like things to reflect on around this. So thank you again. You're just amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you everyone for joining. We will send out the recording so you can go back and rewatch this and kind of like take as much advice as you want from it. Thank you again, everyone. Stay well and take care, everyone.